And where there is pain, there can be gain. And now, here's Evangelist Suzanne Neal.
God bless you. This is Evangelist Suzanne Neal. Truly honored to be in your hearing on today. Appreciate the Lord for what it is that He's doing. Appreciate you for tuning in on this afternoon. I want to first of all give honor to God for who He is in my life, what it is that He come to do, and what He is doing in your life. I have a topic that I want to talk on today. It's a piece that God has actually been dealing with me about in my own personal life, and I do know that this is not just my own life, but I know that this has to be affecting many others that's also walking in ministry or just living the life that God have called them to, and seeking to juggle everything that God had placed in their lap or in their hands to do. I recently had a conversation with my pastor, which is Pastor Herman L. Murray, a couple of weeks ago maybe, and I asked a question. I said, "How do you balance? How do you balance life, ministry, church, family, and careers?" And he said something that was profound, which is seems like he always does. However, what he said was, he said, you have to be where you are when you're there. Basically telling me that if you're going to be at work with all of your mind, be there on your job. And if you are going to be with your family, be there. And when it comes to ministry, be there. But what I found out also is that sometimes those things can sound real simple. Working it out can be very challenging. And so I want to share with you how God brought me to the conclusion of how to balance ministry, family, as well as career. God called me to the ministry at the age of 22, 23 years old. And when He called me to ministry, I already had a family. I had two children, but since God has saved me, He has blessed me with a husband, and so now I have a husband and some more children. And then on top of that, I also have a career whereby I do a public job. And I found out sometimes some things that we're doing is just more than what God have called us to do. And when I say that, I'm talking about all of the extra stuff. And God began to speak to me. He said, don't be too busy for me to use you. And sometimes we get it twisted. We think that ministry equals church stuff. When I say church stuff, I'm talking about all the extra stuff that we do in church that God really don't have anything to do with. However, because it is something that the church is doing, we find ourselves caught up in that. And so God began to deal with me. And what He began to show me was that in Ecclesiastes 3:1-8, He said, there is a time and a season for everything. And He began to talk to me about the season that I'm in, and the time that I'm in, and what it is that He come to do. And also He began to deal with me on John 5:30, whereby it was spoken that without Him I can do nothing. And He began to tell me, He said, in order for you to be successful in all of your life, sometimes we're unbalanced. We may be successful in ministry, but our household is falling apart. We may be successful women in ministry, but it looks like though we're pampering and we're loving and we're ministering to all the other saints' children, but our children may be going veering a little bit to the left. And then you may have your career, and your career may be advancing for you, but yet you find yourself kind of leaning more to it than to ministry. So it's kind of hard sometimes for us as women to be able to balance it all. And so you find yourself almost appearing as though you're a clown because you're doing a juggling act, and it's guaranteed that something is going to go lacking. And but what God began to show me, He said, what you must first do is put me first. And putting me first doesn't mean that I'm at every church event or I'm at every job event that doesn't have anything to do with my career, but because your team or my team may have something they want to do after work, and then I find myself trying to cater to that because I feel like that this is important. However, I come to find out that everything that we're doing, God has not sanctioned it. He have not called us to it. First things are first, people of God. I want to encourage you first, when you're seeking to balance your life, make sure that you putting God first. When I say putting God first, I'm talking about not only putting him first in your heart, but also putting him first in your day. And sometimes if you are so worn out from the night before, you find yourself losing that seek time. And Jesus told Peter like this. He says, Satan coming. He come to sift you as wheat. And so there are ways that the enemy is sifting us as people of God. And the way that he sifts us, he starts out by sifting us through our prayer relationship with God. And so if he can have you so busy and so tied up with so much stuff, whether it be church, family, or career, but all the three, you find yourself stretched real thin. And so you're not able to give God the time that he requires because you're so busy giving everybody else you. And God began to teach me, or he began to deal with me. He said, until you're able to give me the more part of you, then nothing else is going to be balanced. Because the foundation of God is sure. We must, first of all, establish our relationship with him and build up on it. But a lot of times after that we start building, we get off of our knees and our relationship with God begins to lack. And because that relationship with God is lacking, then everything else is going chaotic. Because understand, if you're not seeking God, then you can't hear God. And so God is not instructing you. And so now you find yourself real busy and you're doing a lot of stuff that God have not ordered you to do. It may be a good idea, but is it God's will? Is it God's order? Is it what God is it something that God himself will be able to benefit from by you doing it? And so I come to the conclusion, and I myself have been found guilty, whereby I now have to scale back a lot of things because what I thought was God wasn't really God, but it was good. And so now we find ourselves doing a lot of good things, but it's not God things. And so in order for us to know the difference between the two, we have to be able to seek God first. Because when you put him at the beginning of your day, the word of God tells us in Proverbs, he said, acknowledge me in all of thy ways and I will direct your path. And so we're missing it because we're not acknowledging God on the front end. But we come home late at night after that we've done everything that we thought was important. And then God is on the back end and we're too tired to even hear God speak to us. Because granted, here it is. You jump up in the morning at the last minute because your day has been so toiling and your day has been so long and your energy is far spent. And you're juggling this life, this thing we call life, and lay members and pastors and bishop and apostles. It is so important for us to understand what's first. And what is first is our relationship with God. And as you build your relationship with God, God will be able to lead us. And when we begin to find ourselves imbalanced in certain areas, God will quicken our spirit and let us know, wait a minute, hold on, come on back over here a little bit, because this is requiring my attention, not your attention, but his attention. And so I've come to the conclusion that when it comes to balancing ministry, family, and careers, that it cannot be balanced without first seeking God, without first allowing God to be first, because without him, we cannot do anything. Without him, your church is no church. Without him, your family is no family. Without him, your career is no career. And so that's why it's important for us as people of God not to be so busy and caught up in things that are important to flesh, but not important to God. Remember what I said. It could be a good thing, but is it a God thing? It could be a good idea. It might bring people together, but is it God's doing? Is it something that God have ordered? Is it going to strengthen you spiritually? Is it going to cause God's overall purpose to be performed or perfected in you? And so, like I stated earlier, I'm finding myself scaling back in some areas because I found out the hard way that just because it's good don't mean it's God. And just because I think I want to do it, or I think it needs to be done, doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be done at that time. And so I find that a lot of people are so busy that our children are lacking our attention, because we're spending so much of our attention in other areas. Marriages are being strained because it's not being in the right priority, and our relationship with God is almost obsolete because we thought that our church stuff was a God thing, when in actuality it was just a good idea. And so, like I first stated, we as people of God must be careful, because just as the enemy sought to sift Peter as wheat, he's also seeking to sift us. He's sifting us through a lot of things, and you examine yourself. You examine your heart on today, and if you find yourself struggling with this thing, go back to the basics. When I say go back to the basics, let's go back to our knees. Let's go back to the foundation. Let's go back to allowing God to be first, and let ourselves get out of the way. Let our pride get out of the way. Let our egos get out of the way. Let our desires that have gone before God get out of the way. Because Jesus said it like this. He said, John the Baptist said it. He said, I must decrease that he might increase. And so a lot of times we're increasing, but Jesus is decreasing, because we are so busy doing things that he has not sanctioned us to do. And so with that being said, once again, I want to encourage you. I want you to understand that there is indeed a day of rest coming for the people of God. But that day of rest will not be found without God. It's not going to be found in our jobs. It's not going to be found in our families. It's not going to be found in the church. But it's going to be found in our relationship with God. Because understand, rest is a state of mind, meaning that you're in a state of peace. It doesn't necessarily have to come when you leave the earth, but we need peace on earth. We need peace within ourselves. And if we're too busy, guess what? You're not at peace. If you're stretched thin and you don't know if you're going or coming, and your strength is failing you, that's not the will of God for us. It's not the will of God for mothers and fathers alike, because a lot of times we are mothers when fathers are not fathers, and some fathers are fathers when mothers are not mothers. And sometimes children, once again, are suffering because we have gotten so much going on that is all going wrong. And so I just want to encourage you once again on today. This is Evangelist Suzanne Neal. I want you to understand that